The M103 and Conqueror are both Cold War heavy tanks designed to counter the same thing, the IS-3 and other heavily armored Soviet tanks. Both of these tanks feature heavy armor and extremely powerful guns. Let's see how they compare in War Thunder, starting by looking at their armor in the armor viewer. Starting with the M103's armor, I'll be using the 122mm from the Russian tanks. Starting with BR-471B, most of the hull is invulnerable to this round. Just above the turret ring, there's a shy chance of going through. If it does go through, it can one-shot it. However, with this round, it's not that likely. One weak spot with the M103 is the cupola with this round. If it penetrates, it can detonate and destroy the whole tank. Besides that, there's not really that many weak spots to go with the M103. So against full bore rounds, it's actually quite strong from the front. Let's change the angle a little bit. If we change the angle, the corners of the turret become very vulnerable. This isn't even that much of a degree of change. If it gets pinned by a 122, you're going to one-shot it. The hull starts becoming more vulnerable like this as well. And then turning it even more to the side, the actual side armor of the M103 is quite thin, 50mm at its thickest. When we switch over to APDS rounds, the hull becomes very vulnerable. Most at this BR range are going to be able to penetrate it in a decent area. The turret cheeks also start becoming vulnerable, and because it's a small diameter round, the turret ring shot is a lot easier to pull off. Most heat in this BR, once again, will go through the hull, and large portions of the turret are also vulnerable. Let's go ahead and look at the Conqueror. With the Conqueror's add-on armor, most of this vehicle is invulnerable from the front. One decent shot is going for the cupola. If the 122 goes through here, it's likely to one-shot him. There's another big weak spot in this vehicle, and that's the lower glacis. A shot here is going to do a lot of damage to the tank with a 122, possibly one-shotting it due to overpressure. Let's go over to APDS. Due to the addition of the extra armor and the whole upper front plate being 130mm sloped pretty well, most APDS are not going to go through here. As well as the turret as well. The area around the gun shield is vulnerable to APDS rounds, and in the corners up here. The turret ring is close to 300mm of effectiveness, so most rounds aren't going to go through. If they do, they'll hit the turret ring, and if you have really high penetration, they'll go through and hurt some of the crew. Now let's go over to heat rounds. With heat rounds, the hull is vulnerable from the front. The turret, however, is quite well armored. Most of it's at least 400mm thick, so you'll need higher penetration than that to reliably go through the front of this vehicle. It's looking like it's pretty well armored when you compare it to the M103. Now, one thing to mention about the Conqueror, even from the side, the turret's quite strong. It will become vulnerable to heat rounds, but solid shot APDS is still quite strong. The hull, however, just like with the M103, 50mm thick. Any round that hits your hull like this, going to do a lot of damage to you, possibly one-shot you. Overall, so far, I'd say the Conqueror does have an advantage in terms of armor. Let's go look at firepower versus an IS-3, the tank these are designed to defeat. Going back to the M103, M358 is going to have some struggles going through the front plate. Even if it can penetrate at really close ranges from the front, it's like you just ricochet off. The lower front plate isn't very vulnerable either. There's a seam here between the two joins. It can go through here. It's a pretty small shot to make though. One shot you can try making is going to the driver's hatch here. The penetration here could possibly one shot. This part of the turret as well is vulnerable. You go through there, you're going to kill the breach, maybe take out a few of the crew. Now, the M103 does have other ammunitions though. Let's take a look at the HE round. One fun thing you can do with the HE round against this is shoot him right in the driver's hatch. It has enough penetration that it'll go through, killing the entire vehicle. Another ammunition type the M103 has when you unlock it is heat. With heat, this tank becomes trivial to penetrate, and with good placement, you're going to one-shot him most of the time. That's all the ammo the M103 has, so let's take a look at the Conqueror. First things first, the Conqueror has the highest vertical penetration of any APDS in the game. It doesn't really struggle against the IS-3 very much. One issue is that it has first-generation APDS, meaning that it has a chance to shatter against thin armored plates. This can become quite aggravating with the Conqueror. The driver's viewport is also vulnerable. Decent ports to the turret are also vulnerable thanks to its extremely high penetration. Let's take a look at it from 2,000 meters. At 2,000 meters, the lower portions of the hull are still vulnerable. The APDS is quite powerful. The turret is still vulnerable as well. Definitely a good gun for taking out the IS-3 even when you're stocked. Another round that the Conqueror has is Hesh. Hesh can be a little bit difficult to use thanks to its low velocity and damage fragmentation pattern. Now, large portions of the turret are vulnerable to Hesh rounds. A well-placed shot can actually one-shot an IS-3 with overpressure. Now, both of these tanks have the same reload rate at a little under 20 seconds with a stock crew. I would give the Conqueror an advantage in firepower when you're stock. However, when you get heat in the M103, it evens out quite a lot, with the heat round not having issues of shattering like the APDS on the Conqueror. Let's go take a look at the mobility. Taking a look at the transmission here, you'll see the top speed is 34 kilometers an hour, with the reverse speed being 12 kilometers an hour. Let's go look at the M103, and then after that, we'll do a test drive to see how they perform in a straight line. With the M103, you have a 33 kilometers an hour forward speed and an 8.5 kilometers an hour reverse speed. So first thing to note, the reverse speed is quite a bit slower on the M103, and the top speed is just a little lower. Let's do a test drive to see how they perform dynamically. First thing that we notice with these two tanks is that they practically have the same acceleration. It would make sense for this because these are very similarly designed vehicles. Another thing that you can notice if you look carefully, the gun's completely level on the Conqueror while it's driving. This is because the Conqueror actually has a 2-point stabilizer. This means it doesn't have to stop to shoot while it's moving from position to position. This actually has an effect both on your mobility and your firepower. So how do these Cold War heavies compare? With the M103, it doesn't have that many weak spots, and there's no lower glacis weak spot, unlike the Conqueror. This means it can be used in cities, where there's not that many hold-down positions, a little more effectively than the Conqueror. One thing the Conqueror has for it is that it is slightly better in firepower thanks to its high-power EPDS, that's really good stock, and you have the 2-plane stabilizer, meaning that you can fire while on the move. Their forward mobility is actually very similar. However, in reverse, the Conqueror beats it significantly. So in conclusion, I think the Conqueror is probably the better heavy tank at 7.7. Now, there are some other interesting heavies at 5.7 that you should take a look at. Here's a video of those right here.